Okay, this is an introduction to Adobe Photoshop for presentation media. Hopefully you've all been able to download it by now. This is kind of what it's going to look like. So before we dive in and really look at the workspace and what this all is, I just want to talk about what Photoshop is. And it is exactly what it says it is. It is a shop for photos. It's meant to edit and blend and stack and work with photos. So you can use it to make your photos better. You can use it to make a portrait better. You can use it to change backgrounds. And you can also use it to create your own artwork. And you can also use it to paint original artwork as well. So it does kind of double duty. It's kind of the original gangster of art programs for computers. It was up against Microsoft Paint. I believe it was released in 1990. I think I took a class in it in the early 90s at the Beckman Institute in Champaign. Urbana. It's in Urbana. I lied. Um, it's it's a roster program, so that is important to understand what a roster program is, and what to rosterize something is the way that the program thinks. It's the way that it understands what it's doing. So it understands basically layers and layers of pixels. So rosters basically just means a grid of pixels. So roster and pixel are kind of interchangeable in terms of terms. So Photoshop understands a big grid of pixels, and its workspace that you define is a grid of pixels. So when you think about like your television, 1080p, that's a definition of how many pixels per inch. So no matter what the overall size of your image is, it's going to have the same number of pixels as Photoshop defines it. So if you open up a image that's like say 5 inches by 7 inches at 300 pixels per inch, and that computes to, I don't know, let's say 10,000 pixels. When you triple the size of that, if you make that like a 15-inch photo instead, it's still going to have the same number of pixels. So that's one of the complications with roster programs is as you make the file bigger, as you blow them up, they lose their resolution because the photo has the pixels that it has. This is in contrast with vector-based programs, which instead of memorizing what a bunch of little dots look like, it memorizes points in space and how they relate to each other. So that's how CAD programs, Adobe Illustrator works that way. Vectorworks works that way. A lot of your drafting programs and everything like that are going to work based on vectors. So Photoshop thinks in pixels and rosters. It doesn't think in vectors. It has a few vector tools, but they're kind of like imitation vectors built within a raster framework. We don't need to get into the complications with that. But anyway, so what Photoshop memorizes is layers of pixels. So instead of just having one layer of pixels be your photograph, Photoshop can remember pixels in 3 dimensions, and that's what you get layers. Now the image is essentially flat overall, but you are able to stack layers of pixels on top of each other, and you're even able to tell those pixels how to behave based on the layers that are below them. And this makes it a really, really incredibly powerful program. So that's why you can do things like paint on top of something and have like the original shading show through and stuff like that. So it's a really, really smart program, and there's a lot of stuff that's built into it. We're not going to get into all of it, but that's what we're going to cover. Okay, so this is basically what your workspace is going to look like when you open it up, as long as you have Adobe Photoshop 2020. If you have 2019, this workspace looks a little more different. Photoshop is moving more and more towards cloud-based services and cloud-based programs. So hopefully you have the 2020 version and you are good to go. So you can go to Create New, open an existing document. Here are some things I've been working on recently. And here, I love this new feature here. It has like little tutorials about how to do stuff. This is a real easy thing, using a pen tool that's colored and then a little drop shadow on it. So I'm just going to click on that little PS button, and this opens up the workspace, and that's what I wanted to do here. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so that as I'm showing you these things, I can show you what they're doing, I'm just going to drop a picture in here. And I'm going to drop a horrible photograph of myself in here. I use this as a template for stage makeup for tracing the face. And all I had to do there was just drag and drop that in there, and I get this little tab. If I drag and drop another image in, I'm going to use this one later. It's going to drop it in right in the same photo. And so you would have to do something different to open up a new tab, but you can end up with things tabbed in here. If I were to click on this photo and right click on it and say open with Adobe Photoshop 2020, if I do that one, it'll open a different program. I'm going to open that up, and there it is. Now see, I have two files up here. I have this file and I have this file. So we're going to stick with this one. So this is the, that's where your like files are going to open up right there. At the top here, you have your menu bar here, which has tabs in it that we're all familiar with: file and edit. And then there's different ones that are specific to Photoshop. We're going to completely ignore 3D for now. We're not going to cover that in this class. But I'm going to talk about what each of these do, and then all these confusing things here and everywhere. So this is your regular menu bar, and then right here you have like your tool menu bar. And if you hover over anything, it generally tells you what it is. Choose a workspace, share an image, search. What's kind of confusing right now, we're in this move tool, which you can see has the little letter V there. Learning, these are little shortcuts. The things in parentheses are shortcuts. If you hit just the letter V on your keyboard, it'll automatically take you to that tool. Tool shortcuts are something that you definitely want to try to pick up in general for your life, and then program specific, because they'll help your workflow within the program. I'm going to post you a short list of some of the ones that you should really know. But you can hover over any tool and you can see what they are. Magnetic lasso is lasso, crop is C, frame tool K, eyedropper I, etc., etc. This is the tool panel, and you can click that and it'll kind of half the size of it, which would allow you to put another thing in here, another little window thing in here. I'll show you about that in a minute. But these are all your tools, and when you click on a different tool, like let's click on the paintbrush tool, and watch this tab when I click on the paintbrush tool. Oh, it changes. So every tool has its own little tool menu bar. So I call this the tool menu bar, because it's just like this, but it's going to have different things that you can edit for each tool that you select. And then you have things over here. You've got these palettes here, your layers, your channels, and your paths. Paths are going to refer to some vector information that we're not going to worry too much about, and we're not really going to worry too much about the RGB, red, green, and blue channels. This has to do with color, and we don't need to get into this for the depth that we're going into. We're definitely going to work in the layers palette, though. Right here is the layers palette. We only have one layer. It's called a background layer. You'll see it's got a little lock, and that lock is clicked. By default, when you import something into Photoshop, when you open something in Photoshop, it makes it a background layer, and you cannot edit background layers. So that sounds like a real big problem, but if you just double click on it and you can just click OK and rename it layer 0, now you can edit it. And you can also always put in a background layer if you need one. So you have all these windows here, and you can actually take them and drag them around. Like I can take my layers palette and drag it out of that space and then drag it back in. Drag it back into that space. There we go. And I want it over there. So you can reorder where things are in your workspace. And if you go up here into Window, Workspace, there are some preset workspaces for different things. Like if you're painting, here's a workspace that's preset for painting. Here's one for photography. Here's one for working in 3D or motion. And then you can create your own workspace as well and save that so that you can have things set up the way you like in here. Underneath the Windows palette, you'll see a lot of things like these are the windows that are showing right now. So my color palette, see that's right there. That check means it's showing. My layers palette, that's right there. So all that stuff is showing there. And that's how that works. Now, you might do some things on accident. Like, let's say you click on this in the wrong way and you end up dragging this out of here. You can drag it back by just picking it up, and you can see that little blue highlight, and that's going to kind of lock it to the side of the application. But let's say you do that and you accidentally hit that instead. Okay, now all your tools are gone and you can never use Photoshop again. No, go to Window, go back to Window. Down here, Tools, just click Tools. There it is. Grab it here and snap it. That's not quite right. Grab it here and snap it. Get your little blue thing. Snap it to the side of your thing. So you can move things around and add things. Like right here, we have our properties, which will tell you information about whatever you have selected or whatever is open at the moment, depending on how that's working. This is your history right here. So if I click on that, it pops out, and then I can take this and drag it somewhere else, or I can put it next to that. I can collapse it, open it, collapse it. You can also collapse that. So there's lots of ways to move windows around. So just practice moving some windows around. Don't be too scared. You can always go back and find them in your window palette. Everything you ever want could be here. Like, you can pull up brush settings and have that brush settings palette right there with you all the time if you're painting a lot. Or you might want to take this and like drop it into there. Okay, now I've got my brush settings there whenever I need them. If I need to pull those out, I've got them. I don't actually want that out, but so that is a little bit about your workspace. In terms of snapping it back into place, it goes by where the mouse is, so you have to kind of make sure the mouse is over where the little blue magnets are. Okay, what do all these things do? We're not there yet. We'll get there. So let's start by going down the line on the menu bar. So Photoshop, underneath that, there's nothing that's crazy important for what we need to do right now. File has some pretty generic stuff in here. There's reasons to need to export things specifically for file formats or for other programs you might need to export as opposed to save. So the general thing you would do with a file is save it. And the first time you save something, it's going to ask you where you want to save it. We'll save this on my computer, and we can call it Toryface. You can obviously tell it where to save it. You can save to cloud documents. Here's what I wanted to show you in here is the format. So I have told you that Photoshop thinks in layers. And so in order to preserve that information, you need to save it as a Photoshop document or as a giant Photoshop document, which I don't even know if I have that option here. So there's a couple different Photoshop formats. You're just gonna go with Photoshop. That's gonna be fine. You can also save things as a JPEG or a GIF. Or anything else in here. But generally in this class, we're going to save them either as Photoshops or JPEG. So when I say you want to save a flattened image, you can physically flatten the image in Photoshop, but then you lose that information for Photoshop as well. So you do something like click on JPEG and it says, oh, this automatically is saved as a copy. So it's going to automatically save a copy that's a JPEG that's flattened. Now this file only has one layer anyway, so there's nothing really gained or lost by doing that. But when you save your Photoshop tennis volleys and send them off to your partner, I want you to save a JPEG, a flattened image. I don't want the other person to have access to your layers. So we don't need to save this because we haven't done anything with it yet. Okay, so this is my face. So that's what you need to know about savings. Edit, there's a lot of stuff in here that you're going to use a lot. Probably the one that we'll definitely go for is transform. That's a way to kind of change an image. I'll show you what that does. Let's do transform distort. And it allows you, it just picks up my image and it allows me to change that and skew and move those handles. And the different kinds of transform allow you different options for how you and I'm undoing that. different options for how you transform it. So it's how you transform a selection or whatever is in a layer. If you have something within a layer selected, it will transform that. If you don't have something within a layer, it will transform whatever is in that layer when you select transform. And when you're in transform, like I am right now, I've got this little blue rectangle around it. You have to hit enter to get out of it in order to do anything else. So if you feel like your program's frozen and not working, make sure to hit enter to exit out of transform. I know that it's hard to figure out in context what all these things are. We're also going to use define pattern at one point to learn how to make patterns for either our fabric in our rendering or our wallpaper for our scenic paint elevation. In image, there's a couple things that you should know about in here. One of them is definitely adjustments, adjustment layers. So these are the things like the basic ways you can just kind of overall edit your photo. Now this is going to edit the layer. If you want to be able to turn this on and off and get rid of it, you would want to go down here and create an adjustment layer, which I believe is this right here. So I can create a layer above this that does the same things, but it preserves the this original image in case I want to get rid of my levels adjustment or whatever I've added. So we'll definitely talk about adjustments when we look at how to do some quick photo edits. These are some auto photo editing things that it does. They're not great. And then image and canvas size. So those sound like they're the same thing. They're not. The image size, if I change the size of this image and make it bigger, the entire document will get bigger. And that's okay. But let's say like I wanted this document to just be wider. I just wanted some space behind me so I can add some other stuff. If you're going to do that, you need to change the canvas size. So I'm going to change, right now it's 28 inches wide by 22.319 inches wide. And those numbers are, those inches are based on the number of pixels that are in it and the resolution it's set at. So this is set at 72 pixels per inch, which is a fairly low resolution, but pretty standard for the internet. So it's got a lot of data in it. So it's at 72 pixels per inch, this image is pretty big. You can look at it as pixels. That's the size of it. That's how many pixels are in the image. And that's kind of a more true way to look at it. And if you alter the resolution, the overall size will get bigger. But anyway, what I'm trying to show you now is, let's say that I wanted the size of this document to actually be like 30 inches wide. And I don't click relative because that would scale the whole thing. That would scale the height as well. I just wanted to make it wider, the canvas that's underneath it. Now you see I've got this little gridded area. This is showing blank canvas underneath my image. So that's the difference between image size and canvas size. Image size is just going to rescale what's already in there and make it bigger or smaller based on what you tell it to do. Increasing the canvas size will give you blank canvas wherever you want it. So that can be really useful. And I'm going to go ahead and undo that. To undo, by the way, you can come up to edit and click undo or redo. You can see that's what I just did, a canvas size. I can redo it here, but you can also click Command Z to undo and Shift Command Z, and it's Shift Control Z if you're using a PC. That little symbol means command. Control is what it would mean in a PC. So that's a quick command you want to do. I use Command Z all the time. That's basically all we need to know right now about what's in this. In layer, there's a lot of stuff in layers. We can talk about layer masks later. I'm not sure if we'll get to it. They're really useful in the workflow, but there's ways to think about things without using that. You can add adjustment layers from here. You can add a new adjustment layer from the layer menu right there. You can also do it right there. One of the things you'll find that's a little scary and intimidating about the program is that there's 10 different ways to do any one thing, and you're going to find the way that works best for you. Layer masks, layer style is really fun. This is especially fun for text or things. The little tutorial that was present when we first opened this up about that looked like a little neon triangle, that uses some of these layer style things to create something within a layer. And we'll look at what that is. Type is going to only refer to text. Text exists in its own world of formatting. So Photoshop has text formatting kind of built into it. But then if you want to do some other magical things with Photoshop with the text, you have to rasterize the text. And at that point, you can no longer edit it as text. You're editing a photograph of text as opposed to text that can be edited the way you edit text, like deleting a letter in something like Microsoft Word. So that's something that's important to know about type. Once you rasterize it, see, rasterize type layer, it's no longer type and it doesn't go back to being type. There are many reasons to rasterize your type, but you want to make sure it says what you want it to say before you do that. You also can't change the font once it's rasterized. And type, when you put it in, when you put text in, your text tool's right here, by the way. When you put text in, it will appear in its own layer over here. And we'll go through some of that. Select, you can select all layers, you can deselect all layers, you can select all, Command A, and deselect, Command D. Those are quick commands that I use all the time. Another one that we use all the time is select inverse, and you have to have something selected for that to be. So let's say I wanted to erase everything but my eye. I'm just using a rectangular marquee here, but I can select my eye. Right now, this is selected. But let's say what I actually want to do is edit everything around that. So I go up to select and I go select inverse, and it looks the same, but you see now this is out here. So if I click this is my erase tool. If I erase now, stuff in here is going to be erased, and this would not be erased because it's not selected. See, it's like magic, and now my eye is existing in a void. But that's not anything we need to do. Command Z to undo that, and then Command D to deselect. Filter, these are filters that you can apply to a whole layer. So you can see kind of what they do. There's a lot of fun things that you can do in filters. Gaussian blur is like one of the most common things, and this just kind of softens it up. You can see all of a sudden now I look like I'm in an old photograph. And you can see how that softens. So a little bit of Gaussian blur can be wonderful if you've got a photo that's actually so high resolution that it shows all my nasty like age spots and blotchy skin, like this one does. A little bit of blur can make some of that go away. So that can work in your favor for certain photographs. 3D, we're not going to deal with. View is just going to deal with how how certain things are set up within here. And window, we've already talked about everything there is there. So that is a super brief overview. And next we're going to run down the tool palette and we're going to use each one of these things. Okay, so now we're going to look at the tool palette, and we're going to look at what each of these things does. And while we're doing that, we may come up through the menu palette up here, and we're going to look at what some of these things down here do. So we're just going to run down the list. So the move tool, this is wonderful for like picking up it's going to pick up whatever is in this layer and move it around. It just kind of automatically selects the layer and moves it around. And if you move something you didn't mean to, you can just Command Z to get back to it. Let's, for the sake of funsies, let's go ahead and drop this Spinosaurus in here. So now the move tool also shows you that it can scale. So I'm going to set that in there. That rasterize that image. Okay, now I've got this guy in here. Boris Johnson's not doing good, guys. So I'm going to set that in there, and I can move that around too. And you can see it dropped it in another layer. So just importing an image, it'll automatically bring it in a new layer. So that I can edit this or I can edit this. So if I'm in this layer and I've got my move tool selected, I'm moving around the picture of my face. And if I'm in this layer and I've got the move tool selected, I'm moving around the picture of the Spinosaurus. And I can also use the handles to make it smaller or bigger. And if I hold shift while I do that, then I can warp it a little bit. And I can also always go into image, edit, transform, and I can use these transform tools again. And I can do the same thing with this. Even though the canvas is the size of my face here, I can still make my face smaller, and then I come up with blank canvas behind me. So That's what that is. And if you click and hold on these, you'll get some other tools down here. I'm not going to go through all of those because it's just too many things. But clicking and holding or right clicking on these gives you even more tools to deal with. There's some options up here I can do too, like auto select. It will automatically select what the most sensible thing is. See, I clicked on that, or I clicked on that, and so it's auto selecting whatever layer it thinks I want to be in, and that can be really confusing if you're trying to select something and it's auto selecting the wrong thing. So you can always turn that off to help you select the right thing. You just click it off, and then now it'll stay in this layer no matter what I click. I turn auto select on and I click the Spinosaurus and it jumps me to the Spinosaurus layer. Transform controls, that's showing. These are some cool things. These are just align, distribute things. So let's say like I wanted the Spinosaurus and me to be like perfectly aligned. I click and then I command click the oh no, yes, both things are selected here. Both layers are selected there. And you click that, that's going to align both the centers, and that aligns both the centers, and now everything's aligned there. Or I can align him with the bottom or the top or either side. So that allows you to do some good things with aligning different things within an image. You can also move things around using the arrows. See, they move them just a little bit. Now, the next tool down is your marquee tool. This is just a really easy way to select something. So you've got a rectangular, an elliptical, and these will select a single row of pixels. I don't ever use these. I usually use the rectangular marquee if I'm to use this tool. So let's say I wanted to select that using the rectangular marquee tool. I could do that. And then I could copy it or paste it or move it or make a mask or do whatever you want. Having tools that are smart at selecting things is really, really critical to Photoshop. So there's like these first three tools here are all selection tools, and each one of them has different drop-down things in it. There's the lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool, and magnetic lasso tool. So they all kind of basically make, this one allows me to just kind of freeform draw a line. Let's say I'm kind of drawing my hairline here. It allows me to just sort of draw my hairline. Boom, there it is. Now I can pick that up and move it somewhere else. I'm in the wrong layer, so it's not doing anything. But if I come down here to that layer, that selection still holds. The selection will stay through no matter whatever layer you're working in. The shape of the selection still holds. I can like Command X. That's not doing what I think it's going to do. Anyway, that's the way you can deal with a selection one way. The polygonal lasso tool, I'm going to deselect, is going to work. This is the magnetic lasso tool. The magnetic lasso tool, it'll every time you click, it'll make a little lasso point, but it also just kind of smartly conforms. See how it's kind of like gripping to what it thinks is my hairline? So this is one of the smart, quote unquote, smart tools within Photoshop that's sort of detecting edges. It's detecting the difference between the edges and figuring out where to put things. And there's different things you can do on this selection right up here in the menu. Like you can put feather. Feathering by 2 to 3 pixels can help make your selection look a lot more natural. And then there's some other things in here that kind of figures out, that kind of tells it how to think about selection. The one I meant to show you was the polygonal lasso tool, which is just every time you click, you can make a polygon. You click a polygon, and that's making a selection. It's not making a shape or anything like that. It's just making a selection. It's just saying, hey, let's look at these pixels right here and do something with them. So why would we want to do something like that? Let's get our Spinosaurus out of the way. Let's say like I wanted to take my face or my head and put me on a different background. So you can use the magnetic lasso or the polygon lasso. So I'm going to select me, and selecting my earrings here will be difficult, but see how it's just kind of sticking to the side of my face? I'm not clicking, it's just kind of automatically like laying down a line where it sees the difference. And you can come back and edit this later with some of the different tools. So we want that and that and that, and click, double click, and it'll make that into a selection. Now that's okay. It's an okay selection. I could then say you can make a layer mask doing this, or you can just do something like the select inverse. That's going to select the background. I go to the eraser, and now I can erase what's behind me. And then I could put something else behind me. This is a really bad selection. I'm going to teach you way better ways to use the selection tool than by doing this, but this is a super simple way to take that, deselect, there I am, and then I can let's dump in this other picture here. We'll dump that in the background, scale that up so that it takes up the whole background. I'm just going to stretch this. If I just hold shift, it allows me to stretch it. All right, that's going to take up the background. And then I just, in the layer palette over here, if I just grab that and stick it behind me, oh, there it is. Okay, now I'm in a new layer. Obviously, this isn't a very good selection. I didn't clean that up at all, but that's kind of why you might want to be able to select something. So let's back out of that and deselect me. So that's selection with a magnetic lasso tool. And then there's the quick selection tool, which has other things down here as well. I mostly just use the quick selection tool. This works similarly to the magnetic lasso tool, but it selects sort of a whole shape as opposed to the difference between edges. So I'm just smearing this around on here. And I can also, that was just one big click and smear, or I can click in sections and it'll start to do stuff. And as you make the tool smaller or larger, there I'm making it smaller, it will select more, it'll be more refined in its selection. Like there, I can get it to come in here and add some of my little wispy hairs if I want. And then I can feather this selection to make it better. So selecting what you want to select is something you really do want to spend time with. And see now there, and over here too, I've selected some of the wall and I wanted to get rid of that. I don't want to select that. So what you can do is you come up here in your tool menu, you see you've got these three symbols. This would create a new selection. So if I click that and I started clicking over here, it would select stuff over here not related to this current selection, which is one individual shape. This tool here, which it's set on right now, will just continually add to the selection. So that adds the rest of my face to that selection. But let's say now we've got something that we've got this whole bit of wall here that we don't want in here. So this minus will do exactly what you think it'll do. It'll subtract that from the selection. And you can see now it's getting a little bit smarter. And it's going to be difficult for this one to try to figure out where my earring is. You can also just hold the Option or the Alt key to switch between positive and negative. And you'll see the little plus minus on the cursor changes. So no Option key, it's plus, it's adding to the selection. Option or Alt key, minus, it's going to subtract from the selection. So selecting and doing that is really, really important. And then you can also, if you don't have what you want up here, check under your select menu. So right now I've selected my head. Let's say I wanted to select the background. I could select inverse right there, and that would select the background instead of my head. And let's say I wanted to modify it. You can smooth out your selection, so that'll smooth up all these little wrinkly lines. The one I use most often in here is feather, and you can decide how many pixels it's going to feather. 2 to 3 is what I recommend, and it'll just make a slightly better edge. And then there's other ways you can go in and clean up your selection, which I'll show you at some point. But that's what your 3 selection tools do, is they allow you to select things so that you can do things to them other than just erasing. And they will allow you to make masks and things like that, but we're not going to deal with that. All right, deselect. Now we still have my scary face. And zoom, by the way, I'm working on a laptop, so I can just kind of pinch and stretch on my trackpad to zoom. But if you're not, Command plus will zoom you in and Command minus will zoom you out. You also have a zoom tool here, but the quick tools are helpful. And let's say you're zoomed in, Command plus, I'm zoomed in on my eye, and let's say I'm really zoomed in. And I want to get over to this eye over here. If I just hit the space bar, you see I get a little hand, and it allows me to grab the drawing and move it over to my eye. It's the same tool that's right here, this little hand tool, but I never click on it from the menu. I always just hit space bar. So space bar, Command plus, Command minus. Those are some useful shortcuts. You'll see I've dropped into the Discord server a list of shortcuts. I would either print that out or write them down, have them next to you at all times. You want to practice using them to use the program. So I'm just zooming out there. All right, next tool, crop. Crop does exactly what you think it does. I set that on there, and it just gives me some handles to drag around, and if I hit enter, it's now cropped that, and I don't want to do that, so I'm undoing that. But crop is a pretty simple tool. It crops the image. There's some more nuanced ways to crop things. In here, I don't use this one a lot. I never use this tool. This is the frame tool. So it's not something I ever use a lot. Eyedropper will select a color. Eyedropper can be really informative for helping you understand how much things are not one color. So we ask you, what's your skin tone? Well, what do you mean, my skin tone there? Look, it's like peach. Or here, where it's like orangey. Or here, where it's like gray. So you can kind of click around your face and see where the different colors all come in. And you can see just how many different colors make up your face. And the shadows in your face, that shadow there, that is almost black. It's so dark in there. It's a deep, deep, deep burgundy, based on the lighting and the exposure of this photograph. That's what color my face is there. I mean, this is almost like hot pink down here. So the eyedropper can allow you to pick up color, select a color that exists anywhere on here, and will allow you to then work with that. So if I wanted my general skin tone, let's say I think that's my general skin tone. Now I selected that. Now I can click on my paintbrush, and I'm going to make a layer to mess around with. I can now paint with that and see how much that's not my skin tone. But let's say then I wanted to, this brush is set to multiply. Sorry, that's why that happened. Let's set that brush to normal. Undo both those things. And then, yeah, if I do more, it'll do more. Multiply is one of those commands that tells pixels what to do based on what other pixels are doing. So that just sort of squared this color in color format when that was set to multiply. Yeah, and I could go back to my eyedropper, I for eyedropper, and I could select this color and this color here, go back to my brush tool using B, and now I can get my cheek color in. So you can see how many different colors are in the face. Even colors that you think might be the same are probably not as the same as you'd think they are. So that's the eyedropper tool and how you can use it. It's also really useful if you've painted with a really specific color and then you didn't save that color somewhere. You can save a color right here. You've got your swatches palette here. It's just memorized everything I've done, but you can add colors in here. And you can make your own swatch palettes to keep track of colors you're using for a project. But you can always just take your eyedropper tool and pick up the color from somewhere in your document. Okay, we're there with eyedropper. Healing brush. I'm going to cover healing brush and the stamp tool, which is down here. We're going to deal with the clone stamp tool. You see I had it set to the pattern stamp tool. We're going to start with the clone stamp tool and the healing brush. They both do similar things. The healing stamp brush is a little bit smarter, but the clone stamp is sort of the predecessor to it. So we're going to zoom in here, and let's say we want to get rid of my freckles right here. So what the clone stamp tool does is it references another part of the image and then just kind of pastes that image over. So this is a great way to cover up some stuff. I'm going to use this a little bit later to cover up a watermark, which you shouldn't do because you shouldn't use photographs you're not supposed to use, but it's all for educational purposes, so that's okay. So in order for the clone stamp or the healing brush to work, they have to have an area to reference. And if I just click, it says you can't do that. You have to define a source for it to work. And you do that by pressing the Option or the Alt key. So if I press Alt, I'm going to get this little like bullseye cursor here. So let's say I want to cover these little blemishes here using the reference of this skin right here. So I Alt, click on it. Now I've got a reference. And this is the brush that it's using. So that's a nice fuzzy edged brush. You can see if I come here, I can change the hardness of that and get a hard edged brush. And if I click there, I'm not in the right image. There we go. Not in the right layer. You can see why you wouldn't want a hard edge brush. That's copied that right over there, and that's not particularly great. So I'm going to undo that and go back to a really soft brush. This is all coming up here in my tool palette when I'm in my clone stamp. So I'm going to Option or Alt select here, and then I'm with my nice fuzzy brush, and then I'm going to move over that, and now that mole is gone. And what it's done is it's just copied this right over here, and because it's a fuzzy brush, the edge is feathered out. And I can click there again, and that's gone. Now you want to be careful. You want to keep reselecting something that's really close to you, because if I were to like come over here and try to use that to select that, I get like a bloody nose or whatever's going on there. So for like that right there, I might select this area right here and then get rid of it like that. The clone stamp can also be used to just repeat a pattern somewhere else, but it is a direct copy. It picks up every single pixel and copies it. The healing brush, by contrast, will select just, it will leave the highlights and shadows, so it's a little more refined, but it's the same thing. It needs a source. So let's say I want to like smooth out some of these giant pores on my nose, or maybe get rid of this like little broken knob right here. So if I select that and use the healing brush, it kind of straightens out my nose a little bit. And let's say I select like here and then kind of paint down the line. You can even see the image being repeated, but it smoothed that out a little bit. But it retains the highlights and shadows of what you're painting over. So it's going to look a little bit more natural. So the healing brush is something to use when you're trying to keep it looking a little more natural. They're both similar tools that work in the same way. You can see I was able to move a wrinkle in my forehead. Let's say I wanted to copy that. Let's say I wanted like more wrinkles on my forehead. If I put my cursor here, select that, you can see I'm getting that whole wrinkle again. So that's something kind of interesting you can do with that. Okay, so that's the healing brush. Okay, so now we're going to look at the brush tool, and this is probably one of the more complicated tools in here, and it's one that we'll use definitely a lot. So it's, as you can see, it's like a little paintbrush, and that was a really big brush. How big is my brush set right now? Whoa, it's very big. Okay. So as you can see, your brush can be very big. That circle is showing me the shape of my brush, and you can make it smaller, and you get a different brush. So how did I do all of that? All right. So if you come up here to your tool, your little tool menu bar here, this here is going to be confusing and show you like basically like a history of a bunch of different stuff you've done and other tools that you can have that it thinks are somehow related to that. I don't really know what that is, but that's a tool preset picker apparently. But anyway, this is the palette that's going to show you what's going on with your brush. So this is the size of your brush. So 175 pixels, as you come out here, that's 175 pixels. That's how big that brush is. If you move this slider, you get a smaller brush. The hardness controls how hard the edge of the brush is. So like this right here is obviously really soft, and this right here has a completely hard edge, and that can go between 0 and 100%. So at 0%, you get this really soft edge, and at 100%, you get a really hard edge, and then there's all the spaces in between that. So at around 50%, you can actually just type that in here. You get something that looks like that. So you can see you've got a whole variety there. But instead of having to come up here and change the size of your brush, there are some tool presets for that. These are ones you'll probably want to have on hand. The bracket tool, the beginning bracket tool will make your brush smaller, and the end bracket tool will make your brush bigger. So you can see I'm going smaller. I'm just using the bracket, not the bracket tool, the little bracket on your keyboard. And that bracket will make it bigger. The other thing you can do is you can hold Command bracket, and you can see there I've got a really, and that will change, I'm sorry, it's Shift, no. Yes. Shift bracket, sorry, Shift bracket. The other thing you can do is Shift bracket will change the hardness. So if you go Shift and hit the small bracket, your brush will stay the same size, but the softness will change. And then if you hit Shift end bracket, it'll make your brush hard. So that was all done just by using the Shift key and the bracket tool. So those are some keyboard presets you'd want to know about. Let's get rid of all those little dots. And then down here you have like your brush sets. So these are the general brushes that Photoshop comes with, and then you've got your dry media brushes from some guy named Kyle. And Kyle also gives you wet media brushes. You'll notice that your wet media brushes are going to behave a little differently. Like if I click on this one, you'll notice if you go look at your tool palette, that if I go into this one here, that I am no longer in a paintbrush, and this is going to be true for some, but not all. I'm no longer in my paintbrush tool. I'm in this smudge tool, this little finger tool down here. It automatically selected because some of those brush tools don't actually put media down. They do stuff to the pixels that are already down. So this is just like smearing out the pixels that are already down in my original image. And if you do this, if you use this brush in an empty layer, like I'll go back here and I'll switch to this empty layer right here, nothing happens because it doesn't have any pixels to smush around. So your brushes can be tricksy that way, but you can come back here to your little thing here and you can go back to like a regular brush and just click on any of these and then edit it with the bracket tools to get it where you want it to be. So that's your brush tool. The other things you have in here that you can do with your brush tool, I'm going to go back into my layer 0. Your brush can be in a blend mode as well. So what a blend mode is, we haven't covered this in layers. You can see right here in your layers palette, you get these options for your whole layer as well, but you can tell the brush to be in that mode as well. So let's say I'm going to just like general brush, and this is not in a normal brush. Hang on. Let's just go to general brushes, soft round. Okay. And if I'm in normal, it's just going to paint. Oh, I'm still in the smudge tool. So I am in my paintbrush tool and normal on just a regular soft round brush right here. So if I paint that, I just get like a little airbrushed line. If I change my blend mode to something like multiply, instead of getting a painted line, it's actually picking up on the pixels below me. I can zoom in on that and you can see the difference. Like all the texture of my skin is showing through that because it's painting that color. It's multiplying that with what's behind me. And there are all these different blend modes, like overlay does something like that. Some of these do really weird things. That turned it green. So you can play with those to get different effects with the individual paintbrush. Now those brushes are only going to sample the layer they're in. So if I did those brushes on those blend modes up here, nothing would happen. So we'll go back to the normal blend mode, and the opacity is just what you think it is. It controls the opacity of your brush. So if you paint a line with your brush at 100% opacity, this is a very soft brush, that's 100% opacity. And let's do it at something like 25% opacity. You get a much softer line. You almost can't see that. Even in the hard brush, you don't see it very much. So that controls just how much paint is coming out of it. You can think of the general default brush pretty much like an airbrush. Flow, also like an airbrush, it's kind of like opacity, that it controls how much paint is coming out at any given time. And then smoothing creates a little bit of lag in your brush, but let me up this to 100% opacity and show you what smoothing does. So, and you can see what the flow, there it is. I brought the flow down. So with smoothing at 0, I can kind of take this brush anywhere and do anything with it, and I can create lots of jagged lines. If I turn the smoothing up pretty high, it's going to automatically smooth my lines a little bit. So I'm trying to make it just as jagged as it was on the other line, and I can't. It just smooths the line out. So that's what smoothing does. Angle right here, I don't use a lot when I'm working from a desktop, but this will control the perceived angle of your media. So imagine if you have a brush holding it at 90 degrees from the page as opposed to like a 17-degree angle from the page, you'll get a different effect with the brush. And this here will allow you to mirror things that are selected. All right, clone stamp tool, we already kind of talked about that. The only other thing is the pattern stamp tool, which will allow you to select a pattern like, these are the ones that Photoshop just comes with, like trees, and it's kind of like you just paint a pattern that already exists. So you can import any number of patterns that already exist out there in the world, tileable patterns. We're going to use this to create our own wallpaper or pattern for the costume or scenic rendering that we do. The history brush it's kind of like an eraser, but it erases only what you've done. So if you put that over an area that's had something done to it, it will erase it back to its original mode. The eraser does exactly what you think it does. It erases down to nothing. So to show you the difference there, if I take the paintbrush and I paint over my forehead and I erase it, I go to nothing. And if I take the history brush and I go over that, it goes back to my forehead. This is the paint bucket tool. The paint bucket tool can also be the gradient tool or the 3D material drop tool. You can use the paint bucket tool as well to drop colors or patterns in as well from up there in the tool menu bar. The gradient tool is kind of fun, and let's pick a color that we like, something nice and bright, and we go, and it'll go from that background color to that. So you might want to change what that is. Let's go from white to blue. That shows you your foreground color here, and that's your background color here. So then if you just, let's do this in a different layer, draw a line, you'll get a gradient from those two colors between your background or your foreground and your background. Now, obviously, that's covered up my whole face, so I could do something like put that on a blend mode, like multiply or overlay, and I get just a subtle fade of that. Or if I put it on something like that, it's more obvious. So those can be, and the paint bucket tool, what that will do, if we go into this empty layer here, and I use my paint bucket tool, and I say, let's say I want this entire layer to be fuchsia, I select fuchsia, and I just click, and I got a pattern because I have it set on pattern. set it on foreground, and you get that foreground color. All right, the smudge tool comes with the blur tool, the sharpen tool, and the smudge tool. So I don't use the sharpen tool a lot. You can see what it does and see if you like it. The smudge tool and the blur tool, you see some of those paint brushes dropped you right down to the smudge tool. The smudge and the blur tool reference the pixels that are underneath them and do things accordingly. So if I turn these two layers back off, let's come back into just my little portrait layer. And let's say I want to blend my hairline. So the smudge tool drags pixels from other locations and pulls them into others. So I could use that to like pull my hairline down like this. It's not very subtle. I can also make it, I can turn the strength of it down from up here, and it doesn't pull as much. Whereas the blur tool just kind of mixes the pixels together. It doesn't drag them around. So you can see the blur tool is a little subtler, and I can increase the strength of it so you can see really clearly what it's doing. And that's the blur tool. This one down here contains your burn and your dodge tool. I don't really use the sponge tool. Dodge is sort of like, it highlights, but it highlights based on the colors that are already there. So instead of painting a highlight on top, the dodge tool will just kind of make the colors that are there lighter. Like I just painted a highlight down my nose and a highlight on my forehead. So this is a way you can kind of highlight, shade, and shadow in a sort of more natural way. And then the burn tool does like the opposite of that. It's like a shadow creator, but it uses the colors that are already there. And it may do something you like, and it may come up with a color that you really don't like. So it's something to try, but it's not the only thing you can use to shade. The pen tool is where Photoshop pretends it has vector memory. It can be useful to create like a very specific geometric shape, but you can't really do anything to it until you rasterize it. So I don't use it a lot, but there are reasons why you might want to use it. By the way, under brush, you also have a pencil tool, which just allows you to draw simple lines, which you can use. Then you have your text tool. And like I said in the previous video, text is its own thing. So when you click on your image to add some text, you get a new text layer that pops up in your layers palette. And it's got some generic text written in it. And you can just kind of click in there and type whatever you want. You can type Tori is the greatest. Greasiest, whatever I was going to type. And then you can change the font size. You can make it bigger. You can change the font, and you can import any number of fonts in here. There's tons of free fonts on the internet. Go find one you love. Let's put this in phosphate. Tori is the greatest. And if you come to your move tool also, you can just your move and scale tool, you can just size that however you want. And you can see when you do that, these numbers up here change. This is still a font at this point. You can do that and have it still be a font. You can also do your layer styles, I think, with it as a font. Go into your layer styles, and we can do something like add a outer glow in neon green. You can see it kind of showed up there. You can make it darker, run the opacity up, and you get like a little neon glow there. So you can play with these inner glows or drop shadows or strokes. It'll add like a little black stroke around everything, and I can change the size of that. So you can do that with your text. You can also, if you want your text, horizontal type tool is the standard one. You can also type vertically. So that would be like that. So you don't have to like hit enter between each line. It'll just automatically type vertically. And then you can also use text as a mask tool. So it will mask out the things underneath it. The This path selection and direct selection tools are some kind of vector things that we won't really deal with. We have your general shapes tools here, rectangle, rounded rectangle. These are just going to do exactly what you think they are going to do. They're going to draw a shape. You can change the size of them here, or you can always come up here and change the size of them. They can have a stroke or not. This has no stroke right now. And I can just pick a stroke color for it, and I can change how many pixels it has. I can make it bigger or smaller. Like I can make it 20 pixels and have a huge border. So those are just general shapes. You can play with those and draw them as you like. And then these two tools here, the what's this one called? The hand tool and then the zoom tool. I always access with quick commands. Spacebar for the hand, and then the zoom tool I just use command plus or command minus to move in or out. And those are that's the basic info about your tools and your tool palette in Photoshop.